Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. I am so thrilled to be back hosting the Daily Creative Challenge right here on Behance Live. And this week, actually for the next 2 weeks, we're kind of mixing it up a little bit. Usually we do XD Daily Creative Challenges, and we're definitely going to be doing XD in these 2 weeks, but we're also mixing in Photoshop because we've heard from a lot of people that they want to take their Photoshop UI and UX projects and do something a little bit different to them. They want to take them to new levels. They want to breathe new life into them. And that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be focusing on how you can take your Photoshop UI and UX projects, bring them into Adobe XD, and do something a little bit different, something you might not be able to do in Adobe Photoshop. So good morning and good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We have Lee, Quasim, Bryce. We have the good old Gus Bot behind Adobe Live, Vladair. If you're joining us live on Behance, definitely let me know where you're tuning in from. I saw a lot of different people from all over the world, which is amazing. We have so many designers from so many amazing places. We have HN. How's it going, everyone? Hope you're all enjoying this Monday, or maybe it's even Tuesday for wherever you are. Maybe Australia. Is it Tuesday in Australia yet? I don't know. It might be. So let me hop over to my screen to kind of kick off what we're going to be looking at over the next 2 weeks. Good morning, David. This is going to be a kickoff, so there's no challenge today, but the challenge is very close. Tomorrow, we're going to be kicking off our first challenge, and if you go to behance.net/daily creative challenge, this is where you're going to find all the information. And you'll notice at the top, we have the new Photoshop icon up here. Not the new icon, but it's right beside XD, which typically was just XD. And right down here, you can register, so you'll get notifications. Hey, Andrew, welcome. Julia. You can register so you get notifications so you don't miss the challenges. And of course, if you do miss a challenge or two, not a problem. You can always jump back in, do these challenges wherever you want or whenever you want. And you have until December 21st to receive these notifications for the challenges. Super exciting stuff. And there's some information down here. The important things is if you do want to participate is to join us every morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. That's when we'll be kind of showing off the new templates, the new challenges, and kind of giving you some inspiration on what you could be doing for each daily challenge. And then over here on number 3, you want to make sure to share it to Behance, and you want to use the keyword XD Daily Challenge. And the importance of that is so that we can go in and search XD Daily Challenge, and we'll be able to find your amazing designs. Like all of these, there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of daily challenges that have been submitted over the last year. And what we try to do is we try to showcase a few of them every single morning, usually from the ones from the day before. And then at the end, on the last Friday, we showcase a lot of them, some of the best ones that have come in over the last 2 weeks. And we won't be able to get to all of them, but there are some amazing ones. And if you just search XD Daily Challenge on Behance, you're going to see some great inspiration and great designs that have come from designers just like yourself, which is really cool. And also on this page, you can download XD for free. XD is a free application, and you can also join our Slack group. And if I hop over to Slack over here, we have an announcement where they just announced that we are live on Behance. We also have an introductions channel. A lot of people, there's over 9,000 people in this Slack channel, which is crazy. From all over the world. And you also have a help channel. There's people from the XD team. There's people from our community team, social team, just in there answering questions all day, every day. And if you want to get feedback on some of your designs that you're working on, either for this challenge or for previous challenge or whatever it might be, post it in the feedback channel. And, someone will be in there just answering questions. And hey, Farouche, hey, Mile, Chris Cannon's in the house. Chris Cannon will be in... He might make an appearance very soon, maybe next week. Who knows? He's a good guy. And then down here, we have our challenges. So Tuesday, tomorrow, we're going to unlock the first challenge. It's going to be fun. We're going to start off pretty slow, pretty basic, and then we're going to work our way up to some pretty cool advanced features in Adobe XD. So to kick things off, I kind of want to discuss why we're doing this, right? A lot of people are asking, why is Photoshop part of these daily challenges? Because like I mentioned earlier, we heard from the community that a lot of people still do UI and UX projects in Photoshop, and I was definitely one of those people. I've been using Photoshop for about 12, 13 years, since 1998 or something like crazy like that, and I was doing all of my UI and all of my UX projects strictly in Photoshop. And then I finally just like pulled myself out of my box and I tried to use Adobe XD, and I realized that it doesn't replace Photoshop for me, and it won't replace Photoshop for a lot of people, but it will act as a complementary application, right? So there are things you can do in XD that you definitely cannot do in Photoshop, like prototyping, for example. Sure, Photoshop has a timeline and keyframing, but XD, as you'll see, can make prototyping so much easier. They have things like repeat grids. They have a lot of different features that you can take your Photoshop documents, bring them into XD, and kind of just expand on them. And I want to show you some of those features today, and to kind of give you an idea of what we're kind of going towards, right? Again, this isn't to replace Photoshop. It's to kind of work hand in hand so you can take your projects to new levels. So let me hop over to Photoshop. Here's Photoshop over here, and here is an example of a project that you might be working on in Photoshop, right? You have a few different artboards, and I know some people don't use artboards in Photoshop, some people do, but I've kind of moved in the direction that I definitely use some artboards here and there. And this is a mobile app that I was working on in Photoshop. And what I might want to do in this second artboard is I may want to create a repeated grid going down the artboard, right? So I would highlight different places, right? Japan, Cuba, whatever it might be. So I have this element here that I might want to house an image. So if I go over to Finder, let me find this image here. I'm going to bring this in to Japan. Oops. Make sure I select the right artboard. That would be helpful. Bring this in. There we go. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. And by the way, you no longer have to hold the Shift key to constrain an enlargement, a transformation, which is, I always find myself holding down that Shift key anyway, but you don't have to do that anymore in Photoshop. Great stuff. So I'm gonna bring that, move that down to the rectangle. You can also use the new frame tool, but I'm doing it traditionally. And I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and click right in between these two layers, or I can right click and I can create a clipping mask. So that basically puts that inside of that shape, right? So what I can do, I have this element, I can select all of these, let's go ahead and group it, and I'm gonna move this down the artboard, okay? And this one, let's add another image. I think this is from Cuba. I'm gonna add this one in here. Make this a little bit larger again. Again, don't have to hold down Shift, it's amazing. Put this into my group, get rid of that image, change the text. If I can spell properly, there we go, so Cuba. So now we have two elements, right? And the process of doing this over and over and over again in Photoshop it's a little bit time consuming, right? So bringing this file into XD just makes the process a lot simpler. So let me show you. Let me delete this group here. I'm gonna delete this image here of Japan, and I'm simply gonna save this document. It's a Photoshop document, I've done nothing crazy with it, but I'm gonna go over to Finder. Here's my Finder, and here's the exact same document. It's that, the world is waiting document. We have that element at the top, and we want to basically create a repeat grid downwards. So I'm gonna drag this file directly into Adobe XD. You don't have to do anything fancy. XD opens, it imports that file. It's the exact same file that we're just working on in Photoshop. And if I go over to any artboard, you're gonna notice all the layers are there. And we have our group, which I probably should have named. Let's name this place. And over here we have a group. We have some images, everything transfers over perfectly. Hey Gladstone, how's it going? So the question is, how do we make that process easier using Adobe XD? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select that group that we created in Photoshop, hold down Command or Control and press R, or I can use the repeat grid button over to the right. I'm going to press that, and we now have these new handles that appear on the right and on the bottom. And that will allow me to create a repeated element down this artboard. So I'm going to create, let's say 4 down the artboard. So I'm going to have 4 different places on this screen. And if I hover my mouse in between any of them, we have this pink bar that appears, and that allows me to adjust the spacing just like this. And I can move it outwards, inwards, I can have them overlapping, whatever I want, right? Let's have it just like this for now. And I can grab my artboard just like that and move it down so I can see all of the entries. Now the big question is, how do we actually get images and maybe even text into this artboard? It's actually very easy. It's a lot easier than it was in Photoshop. So if I go over back to Finder, I have these images right here, and I want to use these inside of that grid. And Josh is asking, so XD is complementary to Photoshop, kind of like After Effects is to Premiere Pro. Absolutely. Some designers are using XD in replacement of Photoshop, and some are using it as complementary. So it really depends on what you're looking to do for your UI and UX projects. From a personal standpoint, I use XD for most things, but for certain things like high fidelity designs and photo editing and things like that, if I want to add adjustments or blending modes and things like that, then I can use Photoshop, save those files to the Creative Cloud, and then bring them directly into XD and then continue my project. So it depends on what you're looking for, but it definitely can be complementary, could be replacement, whatever you want. So I have the repeat grid. I'm going to grab these images, and all I'm going to do, just drag them into XD. And you're going to notice as I hover them over top of any of these images, any of these shapes, I can even drag them on this artboard. Doesn't matter which artboard you have selected. You can just drag them and it pops them in there. And it automatically fills that repeat grid. Doesn't matter if you have 1, 3, 5, or even 200 shapes. And you just drag those images in and it repeats it. If you don't have enough images, it just recycles them, which is really cool. But what's even cooler, and hey Tim, welcome, is it also works with text. So if I have this text document here, it's basically just a plain text document with some places, right? I can just grab this text file, drag it on top of any of these text layers, and boop, it pops it in there. And again, I can just grab the repeat grid, change the spacing, just like that, and I've basically done all that work in just a few seconds. So again, repeat grid is magic. Thank you, Lee. It totally is. It's a little bit of a process in Photoshop, and that's okay because Photoshop wasn't necessarily built for UI and UX work. And that's where something like Adobe XD comes into play, and we have these amazing features like repeat grid that you can take your existing Photoshop documents, bring them into Photoshop, and then do so much more with. And then you have things like overlays, right? So in this example, I have this tiny little artboard over here, right? And in Photoshop, what you might have done, if I go back to Photoshop, is you may have, duplicated this entire artboard, and you may have taken these elements on the details screen. There's a lot of stuff here. Let me group this, right? Copy them, you might have pasted them over here on this artboard to show what that would look like to have a little bit of an overlay on top of the details page. But then you have two separate artboards. It's taking up a lot of room. But in XD, let me hop back over here, we have this feature called overlays. So what you can do in prototype mode, which is where you wire up all of your artboards to actually bring them to life, to actually do something, which is cool. You can click on the flight details button, drag this over to this tiny little artboard. You don't have to have an entire separate artboard. It'll be a tap trigger because basically at this point, we're telling users that when someone taps on this selected object, it's going to trigger the next action. And I might want an overlay, right? And I can position this overlay anywhere I want on this artboard, just like that. And I can also change the animation. So if I want to dissolve, if I want to slide in from the left, the right, up or down, I'm gonna have it just quick dissolve. I'm gonna ease it. Probably don't need an ease, or maybe an ease in and out. There's a lot of different easing options you can choose, and a duration of 0.4 seconds. So now what I can do is if I go to play, I press flight details, we now have this cool overlay that pops up, and it's just there. It just works. Because we have just a little tiny artboard over here, and you can use that for keyboards, you can use it for search boxes, whatever it might be. So there's all these little things that you can do in XD that you really can't do in Photoshop that just help save space and saves time, right? And prototyping can go so far. There's so many things you can do with prototyping. If I select this Japan, even though this is a repeat grid, technically it's a single object, right? It's just this place repeat grid. I can select elements within it. So if someone clicks on Japan, I can slide this over. It'll be a tap trigger. I can have it transition, right? And whoop, there we go. And because these artboards are different sizes, we're getting a little bit of an issue. So if I just go back into design mode, make this the same size, I can turn scrolling on and my notifications off. There we go. There we go. Now we have all those fun options. I can slide it over to the right, or I can push it to the right. And when I click on it, it has this little animation that slides the Japan details over to the right. Press on flight details, and there we go. We have the boarding pass. Cool stuff. So let me show you one more example before we wrap things up. And by the way, right after this stream, Paul Tranny is going to be on deep diving into Adobe InDesign. So if you're into that, if you're into InDesign, stay tuned for that right after this stream. So let me go back to Photoshop. We have this document here. And this is one I show off quite often because I just love how simple this is. And by the way, if you are participating in our daily challenges, you might want to pay attention to this one because we might be revisiting this in a challenge. So I have these two artboards that I created in Photoshop. And it seems like there's a little bit of an audio delay from some of you, so I'll look into that after this stream. Hopefully we can get that fixed for tomorrow. But we have these two artboards, and I wanted to illustrate what a parallax effect would look like on the web, right? So I have two artboards, and it's basically the before and the after. And each artboard has the same layers. It has the hills layer, it has the text layer, and in the second artboard, all I really did was I just moved it around, right? I made the hills a little bit smaller, made the text bigger, and if I go to the first artboard, hide the clouds and hide the hills, you'll notice the text is back there, but it's a little bit smaller. So I just duplicated the artboard, made the text bigger, moved the hills down, made them a little bit smaller, and I made the background mask a little bit smaller as well. So the question is, how do we actually show how this looks when it's actually animated? And you know, Photoshop does have a timeline, but it's not the easiest to use. And it's certainly, the performance isn't great because it does have to render. It's usable, but it could be better. So let me show you how Auto Animate works in Adobe XD and how easy it is to take your existing Photoshop documents and breathe life into them. So here's the exact same Adobe Photoshop document I was just working on. It is, so Paul is asking, could you animate with timeline in Photoshop and drop that into XD? So you can drop the file into XD. It won't have all the animations. The animations won't come over to XD. But the team is looking into other ways to animate in XD, and who knows, we might have some news on that in the future. So here's the exact same Photoshop document, and just like the previous example, I can just drag it right onto Adobe XD, and it's going to import all of those groups, all the layers, all the text files, everything. And here's all that stuff here. And each group, and you can see on this one that the clouds have been moved off of the artboard to kind of move in this like parallax effect, right? So the nice thing about Adobe XD, if you don't want to get super technical, is that you don't really have to do much in terms of timelining or keyframing or anything like that. You just have to wire up your prototype. So if I hop into prototype mode right at the top, and Bryce is asking about After Effects integration, there is After Effects integration. If you can actually export your entire XD document to After Effects if you want some really advanced animation. So I'm in prototype mode. I'm going to select the entire first artboard. Let me move this over to the right. And I'm going to grab this blue handle over to the right. And Farnoosh is asking if we need Photoshop for these challenges. You don't. So we're going to be providing Photoshop PSD files for every single day, or almost every single day. And the nice thing is you can just grab those Photoshop documents, drag them right into XD and keep going. So you don't have to open it in Photoshop. You don't have to do any work in Photoshop. It's completely up to you. So I'm going to grab the blue handle, drag it over to the right to the second artboard. And because I have an entire artboard selected, I'm able to select the time trigger, which you can only select if you have an artboard selected and not individual elements. I'm going to give it a little bit of a delay, maybe 0.8 seconds. The action is going to be auto animate because we basically want the two artboards to animate between each other. And when you select auto animate, XD, when you press play, is going to look at the differences between the two artboards, and as long as the layer names and layer types are the same, XD is going to recognize that and animate it. I'm going to do an in and out, so there's a little bit of a curve at the beginning and the end, and we'll do a duration of about 4 seconds, so it's a nice, long animation. And that's really all I did. I just dragged a wire from the first artboard to the second artboard, did a bunch of things in this little window, and that's it. Now, when I press play, there's going to be a little bit of a delay, and then watch what happens. XD just figures out the rest. So it made the text bigger, it moved the text up, made the mountains smaller. The mask in the background, I believe, changed as well. Let's play that one more time. So there's all these little tiny things, and it kind of helps with that parallax effect. Because if you're, I always use the example of driving in a car, right? If you're driving in a car and you're looking out the window, hopefully you're not driving and looking out the window, but the poles that are right beside you are moving very fast. And then the mountains that might be in the background are moving much slower. And that's kind of what we're replicating here. But you're noticing that the clouds are kind of moving at the same speed as the hills. So we might want something a little bit different. So in this case, we can just jump into here. I can go back into design mode, grab my clouds. Let's grab the top clouds. I'm just going to move this cloud all the way up here. And because they're in a group with other elements that are part of this artboard, they're not moving onto the pasteboard. If they were just by themselves and I moved them off the artboard, they would jump onto the pasteboard. But because they're grouped, everything is good. So now if I go select the first artboard again, press play, you're going to notice that the clouds move much faster than the hills, and the hills move much faster than the background. Cool stuff. And all I did was drag a wire and maybe make a few adjustments to the clouds, but that's about it. If you were to do that in Photoshop, it would be a little bit more time consuming. You'd have to deal with rendering and that sort of thing. And then if you are working with a developer, you can actually save this. You can export this as a design spec, and your developer would have access to your character styles, your colors, all this fun stuff, and any marked assets. So if I wanted my developer to have access to these clouds, I can simply jump in here, press this button right here, and this button, and now when I save this as a design spec and send it to my developers, it can be a public link, it could be a private link, password protected, whatever it might be. He or she would be able to download these files and do what developer magic they do. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do in Adobe XD, and we're just getting started. We're going to be talking about colors and character styles and assets and things like that, and how easy it is to just update these things across the entire document. But as an example, let's say this color here. Let me go into my assets panel, which is down here. Let's say I really like this color, or maybe I don't like this color, but I'm using it throughout my entire document. I can add this color to my assets panel right here to the left. And instead of having to go through and updating that color throughout all my artboards, so let's say I also had over here, let's say I had this color, and maybe on this boarding I had this color as well. Doesn't really go, but we're gonna run with it. And I wanted to change that color throughout the entire document. Well, all you have to do is go over here to the right click, edit, and change the color. And that's it. You don't have to go through and manually update the color everywhere in every single artboard. So it's super simple. How's everyone doing? Good? And Adriano is asking about artboards, and the file came to XD as a disaster. So there was, I believe it was a bug in a previous version where if the artboards were different sizes, there would be some issues. But as you can see in this example here, I brought over a Photoshop document with artboards that were different sizes, and it imported it perfectly. So that, I believe that bug was fixed. It looks like it was definitely fixed. I believe that's what you're talking about. So give it a shot again. Try your Photoshop document and bring it into, it's kind of like global colors in Adobe Illustrator. So there's a lot of cool stuff, and the same works for character styles. You can also have symbol swapping and stuff like that. So this was fun. Hopefully you kind of get a glimpse of what's possible with Photoshop documents in Adobe XD. And throughout the next 2 weeks, we're going to be really challenging all of you to push the bounds of what you can do with some Photoshop documents. Again, you don't need Photoshop for these challenges. You can definitely open them inside of Adobe XD. And I hope you all stick around and participate in these challenges. I'm really looking forward to kicking things off tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. Definitely stick around. We have Paul Tranny coming up with some awesome InDesign stuff. And I will see you all tomorrow morning, bright and early, with challenge number 1. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.